Hello, Empowered Woman. Welcome to this episode of the Empowered Woman podcast. Today, I'm starting a bit of a different format for my interviews. As you know, I meet and talk to several women and also men on a daily basis. It is my passion to get to know incredible people doing amazing things in the world. So I decided to start my episodes with a story and then key action steps so that you walk away with tangible takeaways to apply to your life and also pass along to the people you know. For this first experiment, I talked to my friend and also part of the Polkadot Powerhouse network, Lynn Lambrecht. She's an engaging communicator and a thought leader helping individuals and businesses prepare for contingencies at home and work. She has deep experience garnered from her global corporate career, time volunteering doing catastrophic incidents, and personal experiences with family, friends, and clients. She talked about her story, obviously, and also gives specific steps for you to get prepared for such contingencies. It was an amazing conversation. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Empowered Woman podcast, the #1 show on personal growth, visibility, and profit for women entrepreneurs. If you're wanting to start believing in yourself, giving yourself permission to succeed, and let your voice be heard to make an impact in the world as an entrepreneur, this is the place for you. I am so glad that you're here. My name is Marta Spurk, and I'm your host, triplet mom, woman empowerment coach, and all things motivation extraordinaire. Welcome again, and let's dive into today's episode. Hi, Lynn. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Marta, it's so fun to see you again. Happy day.
Yes. So Lynn is part of an experiment. I had this epiphany a couple weeks ago that I really wanted to be intentional with the connections that I make because, as many people know, I'm a people person, connector by nature. I love meeting new people and talking to new people, but the problem or the challenge with that is that you know lots of people, but you don't really know them in depth. And there are some people that you meet that really, there is those quotes that leave a mark, right? That, you keep thinking about them. They show up in different ways, not only on social media, but just in your thoughts, that you just are constantly reminded of them. And I remember after having a conversation with you, that's what kept happening to me. And with wanting to be more intentional with my connections, I realized that I wanted to leverage the podcast to do that and to interview more women that I connect with on a daily basis to share their stories, not only just talk about who they are and what they do in terms of business. That is going to come through regardless because it's a part of who we are. But I wanted to start with stories because our brains connect with stories. Our brains are just amazing at creating the imagery. And that's why I love books, because you create your own imagery. It's not like a movie that the imagery is already there.
Too. And if you go to the movie, you can be utterly disappointed.
I know.
Or you applaud them for having it be fairly realistic.
Right, with their interpretation, especially if it's a movie based on the book or whatever. And I remember the stories that you told me when we talked really stuck with me. And so I thought you would be the perfect first for this new format, and you agreed to it. You're up for it, and up for it being spontaneous and just seeing where it leads us. So I would love for you to start wherever you feel it's relevant.
Okay, give me one little prompter of which story stuck with you the most.
So I think the whole idea of you working with people in the travel industry for years and having to handle loss and having to handle tough topics. And I know for me, being an interpreter and working in the legal field and helping people in very vulnerable situations,
I know
it's very hard because it's not your place to be involved emotionally, but we are humans and we automatically put ourselves in those people's shoes, and you start taking life more seriously, but also remembering to enjoy every moment because this is all we have. And so when you were telling me those stories, especially, in terms of dealing with families.
I know where we can start.
Okay.
The interesting part is that I don't know that any of us ever just happens upon part of life. I mean, I think that in some ways we're products of environment, and we're also products of choice. Yeah. And I was insatiable with my curiosity as the youngest child in my family. You being the mama of 3 at the same age, we had three in our family that my brother started college when I started kindergarten.
Wow.
My sister was the miracle 8 years later, and I trailed behind 5.5 after that. And they were more staid and serious. And I came from a Midwestern Iowa border of Illinois background. And what was fascinating is they were medical. I mean, my family is a bunch of doctors and dentists. So for me, when I had really no idea when I was brought into this earth, and I came out of the blocks like conversational, curious, visiting with all the neighbors. And my family, was like, oh my God, we have a little volcano here. But the other side of me was a very caring and nurturing side. And it was the side that it was so empathetic, and I could feel emotion really easily. So I grew up in a little neighborhood with a dead end court and with a lot of older neighbors. And I used to go visit them, and I'd play cards, and I'd help make tea, and I would do all kinds of crazy stuff. And I would listen to their stories, and I would listen to the things in life. And my dad was a whole lot old. I mean, I was a young child with older parents, and they had both come from very different life. I mean, World War II, my mom playing college golf in the 1940s and dropping out of school to marry dad when he went off to war. Those two creating a code when, because he was in England, and all letters were redacted. And so the way that they communicated was via code of dad letting mom know that he was okay. And, him coming back to the US and going to dental school and starting all kinds of things. So, I mean, I always was listening and watching and observing. Well, I just opted to start saving my money really young. And I loved the fact that my older siblings were like doing things that were interesting in a way from home. And I was an avid reader, still am, lived in the library, and also lived outside. That was kind of nature and books. So I decided to save money and go away to school because I wanted to experience something differently. And when I went to college to help pay for that out of state, I became a resident assistant. And in that, I had my first experience with crisis intervention training. Now, my dad is a dentist, my brother is a doctor. Dad, World War II, my brother during Vietnam.
Wow.
So, I had lots of, when Bill was in med school, there were experiments that he would do at home during break. And I was always very involved, with that stuff, and not grossed out, but didn't have the calling to medicine. So what was fascinating is in the crisis side, it was really more of an emotional, but it could become very physical too when people were abusing themselves, either through, bulimia and anemia, anorexia and drug overdose, and the impact of divorce and all of that. So I really, that was kind of my first exposure. In graduate school, I was a head resident. So the RAs reported to me, and I continued with the crisis intervention side because, then I got to be a support to the RAs, but also, to my fellow colleagues. When I started my career, I started in aviation. And, it was quite a departure, pardon the term, a departure from my family. And I was living in San Francisco. My brother was in the Bay Area also at that time, yet he had just come back from NATO headquarters and was leaving to go out of state again, blah, 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 blah. So I was kind of on my own. And I walked into my job the first day. I was the first woman hired by my airline in the San Francisco sales office. And I had a call, and the call was from the people in headquarters that had reviewed some of my information and had seen my crisis work and also kind of my family experience. And they asked if I would be willing to become a volunteer emergency team responder. And I was curious, of course, as I always am. And I just said, please tell me what that entails. And they said, well, you would be called to work on site if we have an airplane crash. And I said, please continue explaining. And they said, well, you would be assigned to a family, or you would be where the families gather, or you would work in the command center, or you would work on the ground and where the airplane goes down, and possibly in the morgue. And I said, certainly, I mean, sign me up. What do I need to do? And, we had some training on top of my other training, but, I was doing my job. I mean, I was on the East Bay, Marin County, 101 North, calling on corporations, travel agencies, tour operators, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And when I signed up at age 22 out of grad school, I hadn't really thought about, when or if that could happen. Kind of as it is, I worked 2 crashes in my 20s.
Wow.
And the first crash, everyone had died. And it was out of my time zone. I had to take a red eye in. And so all the jobs that I thought I would have working directly with like one family, they weren't available to me because they had already been filled. So I worked on the ground and in the morgue during the day. But then I worked from midnight to 6 in the morning on the crisis phone lines. I was heading up that shift for the crisis phone lines for the family members. And I think what really gets you in that space, Marta, is when, yes, we can't help being emotionally involved or included. Yet, I, being the coming from the German Stoic father, I also at that time certainly learned how to compartmentalize my emotions a little bit differently. And I will always lead with my heart. I mean, it's who I am. It's part of my service. But that was a time when I just thought, oh my gosh, I have to be braced. Our company killed their loved one. That's what I was braced for. And what I received instead chilled me, because it was more of a cry for help of how do I now think about recreating or beginning again my day-to-day life. I don't know where the bills are, or I don't know what policies we have, or I don't know about this or that. Honey, can you help me? And it was my first crash, I was 26. And so I was thinking, my God, I'm living on my own. I'm the only one doing all of that stuff. So of course I know where all of my stuff is. But it got me thinking about my parents. It also got me thinking about my siblings who were older. And it got me really thinking about the fact of how little Americans discuss this. I kept thinking about my grandmothers who had died. I didn't know a grandpa. They died before I was born. With all the other older people. Well, this wasn't just older people. This was anybody. And so from that perspective, I would just kind of lean in and say, okay, these are the things that I have. And this is what, where I find, and this is what I can suggest, and, things of that nature. Yet it really, really stuck with me. And my poor parents, I think, rued the day that I ever got involved with that. Because I became as they say in joking terms, the Chinese water torture. Have a little drip, 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 because I visited them every quarter because I could pop on a plane and do that. And I started asking the questions that they didn't want to talk about. And yet I was also very mindful. I had now had 2 promotions and, all of that other stuff. And so my crash number 2 was 18 months later. So I'm now the grand old age of 28. And when I got the call, they indicated that everyone had lived. And I was a little shocked by that of, okay, how may I help? What do you need me for? And they said, well, the person that I would be assigned to was a real person. And he was just a little bit older than me. He was 31, and his parents had he grew up in a really kind of a small town in a Midwestern state. And it was interesting because when I showed up at the hospital and saw him, he had 3rd-degree burns over 85% of his body. And that could have been me on that because of the same contemporary, age, et cetera, et cetera. But it also could have been me because I was asking some very basic questions of his parents, such as, do you have access to his residence? No. Do you know where he banks? No. Do you have any idea about the bills that he pays? No. I mean, Lynn, the ever proverbial practical one, even within my family, I mean, always down to let's shore things up on a practical level. And privacy laws were strict at that time, yet not as strict as they are now. So I was able to work with our legal team to help at least facilitate some of the decisions and ways that he would not end up with, like no place to live and, bankrupt,
Yeah.
so that was really my huge personal wake up call, because when I got back to Southern California where I was living, I thought, crap, I better do a will here.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so much more than that, because it is, if something happened to me and I'm living, who could help me and how could they step in?
Right.
So in my warped sense of humor, I
Mm-hmm.
created in my mind, how do I create a trail of breadcrumbs?
Mm-hmm.
And so that involved really taking a look at everything I did on autopilot, and did, on my own in a self-sustaining fashion. But if I needed to allow people to come in and help me, how could I make that available to them? And then I started getting promoted more, and now I'm leading teams. And, I kept experiencing, life, with my team members, because life and business intersect every day
Oh
when
yeah.
we're working. And these guys were having a tough time with juggling and taking care of sick spouses and parents and children, and taking care of diagnoses from themselves and whatever. And I kept thinking, my gosh, we just as a society don't have enough conversation about
Mm-mm.
this. And so, I realized from a work perspective that we didn't do a really good job of making sure we were all covered either. So I would pair everybody up in teams of 3, so we'd have a backup to the backup. And I
Mm-hmm.
went to, I was in, when had moved to the Pacific Northwest, I was overseeing 39 online cities. And so, in 2 countries. So I needed to make sure that, access to the office and computer codes and just that basic stuff. So when I had the opportunity to change countries and companies to head up an airline in China, it was an interesting journey for me with my parents, because they'd been hearing me drip, drip, drip,
Mm-hmm.
drip, drip for years. And I said, you guys, at the end of the day, I am not going to be able to help you unless you help me help you.
Mm-hmm.
And so why don't we take a look at some of the practical things? And my dad was an absolute hoot. Big mushy heart, I know where it comes from. And my mom was very spunky. I know where my spunk comes from. But when it's the combination kid goes home, and I said, Dad, what questions do you have? And he said, Lenny, I do the priests and nuns for free. You're the only person in our family that's ever been in business. I don't even know what to ask. I don't even know where to start. And he said, will you come with? And so I did. And all the little local kind of appointments, just to make sure that from the doctor's office perspective, the HIPAA documents were signed, and the insurance policies, the beneficiaries were updated. The bank, that signing authority was there, the attorney's office, to make sure that they updated things. I said, I don't need to listen. I know that the last time you did this, I wasn't even born. That's okay. I said, but let me explain to you the difference between a power of attorney and an executor, and what this does and what that does. So I was the layperson interpreter for my parents. And I just was so grateful, because I knew I could leave the country with a better sense of knowing that there was at least some protection for them. And if worse came to worse, I'd know where to find everything if either one of them, they had been married forever. So I knew that it would be a rough time, a rough go. And ultimately, my parents both had different illnesses strike at the same time when I was in year 4 internationally. And so I came back to the States. And the reason I came back is that when we were out with surgery with my mom, if you will, for a second triple bypass, my dad was really off all day. And I kept thinking, is this stress? But my gut kept telling me it's memory impairment. And so he and I had the mano a mano talk, as mom was, she had sailed through surgery and she was in recovery. And we put together a plan before I went back to Asia, and just for him to start with some preliminary testing. And I told him not to worry if it was what we might suspect that it is, that I'd come back to the States and I'd help out. So 3.5 weeks later, I found out it was the beginning of Alzheimer's. And I knew that that was going to be a very interesting road for my mama, who, yes, she was spunky, but she was also a little dramatic. And I knew that Dad would just go into a shell. And so I was able, thankfully, to move to Chicago and commute every weekend to my hometown, which was 177 miles away each way. But I could do that every weekend, and I could teach Mom how to do all the stuff that I had questions about from crash number one. And I could be there as a resource for Dad, and just kind of that, little supporter like I always am. And, I was just so grateful that we had those updates done, because it allowed for that part of the process for us to be handling some of the administrative side. And in time, and of course, then I worked 9/11 when I was in Chicago. So it was interesting. These crashes kept on coming, and Dad had died, and I had had an opportunity to be in Southern California, but then moved to Montreal to go be international again. And Mom loved it. I mean, my parents loved visiting where I had been. But Mom, in year 4, started failing. And so I thought, okay, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And I didn't renew my contract, and I came back to the States. And I wondered why in the world this was like me having those signs that kept coming. And I thought, they're here for a reason. Why? And I thought, well, every time I do something, I do it from I try to be very basic with my language. And I love working with attorneys and financial people and insurance people. I love the business side. Yet there's a certain lingo that everybody talks. And so the layperson doesn't get it. They don't know it, and, or if they do, they don't want to hear it because it's really hard to hear. And so I thought, well, I want to take a pause from the reactive space. I'd like to work more in the proactive way, where I can go be my fun, inspirational self and share the experiences and find the ways to show that we are empowered when we're making these choices, and we can always change our mind, and we can always update things. And it's just a matter of a little bit of TLC on an ongoing basis. So I decided that was like my patchwork quilt. And in that patchwork quilt, I love looking at the day-to-day things in people's lives, and just how they're looking over themselves from a practical perspective in the finances and the insurances, and if they have fiduciaries in the estate planning, and medical decisions and end of life. It's a thing that's part of my soul.
And I love so many things that have come up for me as you were sharing these stories, because I think all of us have certain things that have happened to us that have brought some awareness into something that we weren't expecting at all. And this is the very message that becomes our message, because it's part of our unique story. Nobody else has lived that. So you can bring in that awareness because it's so real and so vivid for you. It's almost like your responsibility to share this experience because you were there, and the majority of people that you meet have never been in situations like that.
And there's such an appreciation for living every day. And see, there's joy in that. And I mean, I am one that looks at things happen for me, they don't happen to me.
Right.
And so the lessons that we learn, I think, when we have learned them through experiences, I mean, I was cutting my teeth on all this stuff without a lot of internet and, resources and all of that stuff. So now we have almost too much. And so how do we filter it and make sure that it's just something that we can use in that moment? And I just think that it's really cool for us that have been in different experiences, because we tend to act when something happens because we have so much on our plates all the time. Well, what if we shifted that and built our muscle a little bit earlier and said, okay, there are a couple of things that I can do today. I mean, so, I'm the geek that talks to people about, okay, do you have your emergency kits? And, we have fires and earthquakes and tornadoes. And do you have like little backup power sources? I mean, it's the crazy day-to-day stuff that we take for granted. It's on autopilot.
It really is. Well, and so besides the awareness, preparedness, it's something that
huge
has come up for me. And in thinking in general terms, with me wanting to bring more of these stories, it's something that anyone can speak to. Like for me, coming from a different country, there's
Yep.
that awareness, that's the preparedness, or how much you could be prepared for a situation. Having triplets, like that's what I bring to the table, because not many people have lived that. But one thing that stood out to me a lot is having those hard conversations.
I know.
Because when it comes to death, when it comes to big decisions like a move, or even with me having triplets and now having to make decisions, family decisions based on that,
Yeah.
it's those things that you don't want to do until you absolutely have to do. And if had you been more aware before, had you had seen some kind of information indication before, you would have been somewhat prepared, because we can't 100% be prepared
Never.
for anything, but at least have that awareness. And that awareness starts with intentionally going the route that we usually avoid, because it's almost like we want to pretend that it's never going to happen to us until it does happen.
And I'm like the preventative strategy gal. And I am like that at work, and I am like that personally. And my brother and sister to this day, Marta, because our parents are no longer with us,
Yeah.
they keep saying, "You were dropped by aliens," because in our family, it was easier to have what I call the ostrich experience of heads down and little cute bottoms wiggling up top. And my brother and sister still shake their heads. They're like, "How did you get mom and dad to do this? How did you do this? How did you do that?" And it's like, I'm gentle, but I'm persistent. And, I think that none of us can drink from a fire hose in 1 second and retain the water, but we can take like little baby sips.
Yes.
And it's those baby sips that actually build up our momentum and our motivation, and it feels kind of good. Okay, that wasn't as scary, because I tend as a human, I spend more time thinking about it and fretting over it.
Yeah.
And if I just applied myself, so it's a combo of just kind of getting comfy with emotion because it's real, but also realizing that action is real too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And there's going to be hesitancy until we commit. And when
Yeah.
we commit, are we all the way in?
Yeah.
Or are we putting our toe in the water? The
Definitely.
weird thing.
Yeah. Well, and I would love to transition, because I know that all of this sets you up for the work that you do right now. You have published a book,
Yeah.
you have so much to offer. And I would love for you to put it in practical terms for people that now have this on their radar based on the stories that you've just told. What are some of the things that they can start actually doing, just like what you're saying, taking action? Now that we have brought this awareness, we are talking about the conversations and the preparedness. What are some of the key things that you can share with us? And then also all the information for people to go find you.
Well, the interesting piece for me, especially, I think the pandemic was shining a light on this too.
Yeah.
Health issues can happen rather quickly. And it was the first thing that I really started concentrating on for myself, because who is your in case of emergency contact? Okay. And if you have one, great, but have a backup to the backup, because traditionally what I find working with couples is that they have each other, but if something were to ever go awry with both of them together, then who? And so I think that it's important for everybody to have backups for the backups, but this is me being completely anal.
Yeah.
So that side of it from the emergency contact, it's also make it easy for someone to access that. And I'm like the trickster I'm the high tech, high touch kind of gal. So on the iPhone and on the Android, there is a medical ID that we can have. In the Apple products, it's with the heart, but it's on Google Play too, and it's free. And yep, I also encourage caution with those, because the EMTs are trained to find them in an emergency situation, because even on a locked phone, they can access whatever you put in there. And so the whatever you put in, make sure that it's not too private, because you don't want people stealing your identity or getting into your insurance stuff. Okay. Me, the practical one, of course, and the cyber hack. So that side would be first. The second would be to really make sure that the next time you go to your primary care physician, make sure that you ask for an updated HIPAA documentation.
Okay.
Because HIPAA it's not between like you and I, but it is between a physician and the insurance companies and the physician with people. So if I had something that I was diagnosed with suddenly, if I didn't have that HIPAA document updated, they couldn't relay my information to another. And so it's important that we identify who those people are. That's very, very important. Because I mean, I always want us to have have somebody have your back, especially if something happens. So the health, that piece, I want to cover you first that way. Then start thinking about financially, because the access and the power, there are some legal documents that can help us get that ready too. That people get scared of them. But there is, if you don't, 60% of Americans don't even have a will. And I get that. But there are, ways that you can still document some wishes. If the formal way is to actually have a power of attorney, and that would be for healthcare and for finances. Those are the two areas that I think are most important, because you want to make sure that your bills are paid, and you want to make sure that somebody knows that something's happening to you if it's happening.
Amazing. I love that. And that's something super actionable that people can already be
You
paying
can start
attention
at
to.
home.
You can start at home, and things that we kind of already know, but we just don't have the urgency to actually look at it.
I know,
and
but like the real basic one for like you, mama, and all mamas out there.
Totally.
Okay. Schedules. Okay. If you are living with someone and yet one person people tend to play to their strengths. And so we're dividing and conquering, especially with multiple children and, like multiple activities and play dates and schools and this and that. Well, if somebody doesn't show up, then what?
Yeah.
Do you know where they are? Do you know how to find them? So merge your schedules together too, and make sure that you always know.
I love that. Awesome. Well, these are great tips for people to just start getting a move on. And I would love for you to share with us about your book and also how to find you, so that if they want more in-depth and support to actually get those things done with help, so that they don't have to manage everything on their own, how can they find you and how do you work?
Yeah, it's interesting. The first thing I did is I wrote a book. It's called The Living Planner: What to Prepare Now While You Were Living. And I update it every year. I'm in the process right now for editing for 2021. And it's got pre-planning with the areas of life that we concentrate on, at a loss, the things that we need to do, and ongoing follow-up even then after the loss of a loved one. And so I do call my company The Living Planner, because I want us to do things while we are living and not, and feel really good about that. I mean, that's the part. My website is thelivingplanner.com. I sell my book there, but I also have a well-being checkup, and I do that with couples normally. I offer hourly consulting rates, and I work with small businesses too, to make sure that they're shored up and, have their protection policies in place too and all that. But I am in a beta launch right now of taking my book and having an online course that is a book study group. And the beta bunnies, as I'm calling them, are giving me great feedback and saying, there's so much. And then I said, but I don't want you to get panicked. So I'm dividing it up now into sections of my book too. And for people that want to do the whole thing, they can. But so there's some do-it-yourself kind of stuff. The book is, print. It's here.
Yay. Awesome. And I'll put the links in the show notes so that people can go find it. And one thing that I forgot to mention that I love doing at the end is some rapid fire questions. And I'm so excited to hear what you come up with based on all the stuff that we talked about and your background, obviously. So I have 5 phrases that I use that are part of my framework. And so I will just tell you, and whatever comes to mind, whether it be just a word or if you want to expand on it, feel free.
Okay.
So the first one is notice yourself.
Pay attention. Listen to your body. It gives you clues every day. We are participants in our health, not observers.
Yes. Listen to yourself.
I tell you, I love my gut and my little inklings. It's
Mhm.
like little sparkles that come down. And when I don't follow them, they tend to haunt me, kind of like all of this work that I had that, led
Yeah.
me to creating this. It haunted
Mhm.
me until in my fifth decade.
I love that imagery. Forgive yourself.
Mm. So important because honestly, forgiving another is a part of that journey, but blessing yourself first and giving yourself grace and space
Mhm.
opens you up to the possibility of more
Yes, that's where it starts, right? Empower yourself.
every darn day
Mhm.
because everything is a choice.
It is.
And I used to laugh when I was a little girl, especially when my family was all like, "Oh," and I say, "Attitude's a choice." We can choose to have something actually be working for us or to us.
Yeah,
And I think that I would much rather live on the sunny side of finding the lesson
me
that's
too.
there for me.
Yeah. Well, and before I say the last one, it's been on my mind ever since you mentioned. I don't know if you mentioned this when we talked before, but you are the youngest and I
Mhm.
am too. So I totally understand. And I know that that's why we resonate so much too. It's like the
I'm
bubbly,
the
let me
oldest of the
explore.
second generation, though, Marta. I always
Okay.
tease because of the responsibility. I mean, I
Okay.
am like
Yeah.
huge with that.
Yeah. Well, and the last one, last but not least, transform yourself.
We evolve every day.
We do.
And I'd say allow the amoeba within to take you where you're going.
Mhm.
And we can harken back onto what's brought us here, but it's where we're choosing to go that is, that's key.
Oh, so amazing. So much wisdom. Thank you so much, Lynn. This was wonderful. So much even better than I could have planned or expected. I so appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. And you guys, don't be scared. Take a deep breath, one baby step at a time.
Yes.
How amazing was this? I am so glad that Lynn accepted my invitation to come on. So informational and so impactful. Were you listening to those stories and just painting that picture in your head and now thinking about things that you probably weren't thinking before listening to this? I sure hope you connect with Lynn. All the links are in the show notes. And do let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you thought about the takeaways. If you have any questions or suggestions for other people that I should be interviewing and topics I should be talking about that I'd never brought here on the show. And I would also love if you left a review for the show. Rate and review on iTunes or whatever platform that you use. It would be greatly appreciated so that I can increase the reach of the show. Until next time, bye.